Good morning, PT on Ice crew. It is Monday the 12th at 8:30, March 12th already. Can get my watch ready here. See if get any joiners this morning. What's up, RJ? Happy Monday morning, bright and early to you. Mark, good morning, good morning. Another Mark. What's up? Adam? Oh, awesome, cool. We got some people this morning. Good to see everybody. The Institute. See that? Good morning. Could be anybody. Who knows what that is? All right, so good morning. So this morning I'm going to talk a little bit about zooming out and then walking away. And let me start the clock. You don't want to forget about that. Okay, and the idea here is a pretty simple one, and it's one that it's sort of like when you're wrestling with these bigger problems, these questions that are really stuck in your brain. How do you handle it? How do you kind of deal with it? And then what do we do to make it a productive effort? And so last week, if you were on or you saw, I was in the mobile studio and I was cranking along, heading down south for a pretty big meeting, which turned out quite well. And I think another good step in the right direction for a lot of us who are trying to practice on this health-facing side of the world. Today, a little more comfortable, a little more my typical Monday morning, which gives me a chance to kind of get organized for the week and get set up. But what I really wanted to talk about was yesterday. And the reason why was because I have this tremendous list of things that are outstanding. My pile is bigger than ever, and it just seems like no matter what I do, there just seems to be 3 or 4 good things that pop on the pile, right? So you have kind of your good pile and your bad pile, stuff that someday it might be like to get to but aren't that important, and then there's all this other great stuff that you just want to do all the time, and so I have this tendency, this very easy tendency to just kind of hunker down and become a workaholic and just bang out 7 days a week, just constant work. And the problem with that is that really sort of harms my creativity. It really kind of causes me to get into this rut where I just want to crank things out and get things done. And although that's very productive, when it's a little bit more of a creative nature of the problem that I'm trying to solve, I have a harder time with it. And so yesterday, quite sort of serendipitously, I just kind of put everything to the side and decided I was going to walk away. And I think the main reason why was because I was actually in church and I saw a family, and I won't go into too much of the details, but has had some tragedy in their life. And I've been kind of for the last few weeks on this personal experiment of just really trying to understand and empathize and put myself in a situation where I could understand painful stimulus a little bit better. And someday I'll talk about that, maybe a few months or so. And some people know my little N of 1 experiment that I'm currently doing. But at any rate, that is something that I just decided to do and just kind of think about it and spend some time thinking about it. And it was pretty tough. I mean, it's a tough situation, and just kind of putting myself there was hard. So I just decided, I'm just going to kind of walk away. It's Sunday. I'll spend some time with my kids and see if I can do something of value. And it turned out really well. And the reason why I kind of got there was because, you can follow sort of the logic. The logic has been, and I've been sort of talking about this idea now for a bit, of sort of over-struggle disease, right? Like that ultimately the human system is built to struggle, but not too much. And that if we over-struggle, if we push too hard, too often, too long, too many times in a row, we eventually break down. And of course, I've been using that allostatic overload concept. So that's sort of, again, that common thread, that common theme that I just keep hitting on, this idea that the human system is strong, it's built for difficult times, but not too much, right? So not too little, not too much, just right. And then, of course, I've got this other person that I pull from a little bit, which I think I've mentioned before, but if I haven't, you should definitely check it out. It's a book, I think it's 2009, that it went into print by a guy named Jeremy Rifkin called The Empathic Civilization, which is a hard read. It's a long read, but you can get his 10-minute mini TED Talk whiteboard video on YouTube. And basically the main take-home message, the most important message this guy kind of says is that as communication channels change, as we can communicate differently, we can expand our world, right? So we've essentially now, if you follow the logic, become a global world because we can expand our communication so easily. Things like this, we can be seen and heard across the world in real time. And we can have a much more human relationship as a result of it. And as that technology changes, the world shrinks. And that, of course, has been shown out in the data. And I talked on Vice the other night about how few jumps there really are now. Less than 4 jumps for all of Facebook, for example, 1.6 billion people connected by 3.5 relationships on average. So that's a ridiculous thing. So anyway, so what he talks about is the idea that with that change in communication, we have the potential, we have the opportunity to grow, to understand, and really be able to be a little bit more empathic, and that if we were to do that, we could advance the world a little bit further. And so that concept of kind of zooming out a little bit is not unique to me. And that's one that, even though I say this quite a bit, this idea of zoom out and then zoom back in, it's not unique to me. Even Leonardo da Vinci, so I'm going to literally read a quote here from Leonardo da Vinci. "Every now and then go away, have a little relaxation, for when you come back to work, your judgment will be surer. Go some distance away, because then the work appears smaller and more if it can be taken in at a glance, and the lack of harmony and proportion is more readily seen." So even Da Vinci is coming out and saying, hey, look, you got to walk away. Every once in a while, just zoom out, walk away, and let yourself kind of coalesce. And there's some science behind this as well. A guy by the name of Herbert Benson, if you've ever heard of Herbert Benson. He is a guy who was really most well known for the relaxation response, which is in many ways the parasympathetic activation that we all talk about. And it's been kind of cool for me to watch HRV get a little steam in our profession. And so he's the guy who kind of talks about, hey, listen, there's a way to activate that parasympathetic, and one of the ways is to get this relaxation response. He wrote a follow-up book called The Breakout Principle, or The Breakthrough Principle, where he basically talks about this exact thing, is that the most creative people on the planet, they kind of get into these conundrum, difficult times, and they walk away. And when they come back, they're often much more creative, and there's a reason why that is physiologically. So I then took that idea and I said, okay, so maybe I'm not the only one out there. Maybe I'm not the only one that is saying we've got to zoom out, go bigger. We've got to be able to kind of handle bigger problems and get kind of in the public health sphere a little bit. Turns out that there's an author from Croatia in the mental health psychiatry space who was 2016 saying the same thing, wrote a paper and kind of talked about the fact that, look, as mental health practitioners, we can't be sort of so stuck in the weeds. Even though it's good things that we're doing, we've got to get bigger. And so I guess what I'm trying to get us to kind of think about today, and it's just to think about, it's a little bit meta, right? It's the idea of we need to stop and actually spend time thinking. Make time to step away and think, because then and only then will we be able to sort of reel back in, zoom back in, and actually attack our problems. And I want to use a real life example of that, right? So one of the things that we are definitely struggling with as a profession and as a group of professions, as a community of conservative care professionals, is we are struggling with this idea of how are we going to sort of step into this next role? How are we going to go from the weeds to not losing that deep connection that we have with people in a one-on-one, but still be able to handle way more people at a lower price point, because we can't keep up. It's unsustainable to sort of deal with people. And what I would tell you is that communication and understanding are going to be that platform, right? That ability to zoom out and get some, homo empathicus, as Jeremy Rifkin would talk about, the idea of understanding sort of what other people are thinking through our compassion and understanding of their situation. Once we can do that, then we can sort of put processes and procedures in place that allow us to move. Okay, so what does that mean? It means that overall, if we're thinking of people who are overloaded allostatically, that we have to find sort of those environmental triggers that we can just lower that threshold a little bit, just get just a little bit better, so that they come back and they're not fried every single day. If we can do that overall, and we can show that there's value in doing it, so that means data on the other side. We've got to do it, and we've got to collect information while we're doing it, so that we can come back and say, hey, we did this, we got that effect. Now I can, expect to be paid for the effort, right? So that's how we sort of sustain ourselves. And we can do that by zooming out a little bit, walking away from the problem, and then being more creative. So I want to give a very, classic example. A classic example of how we can sort of use things that we see in other places. We zoom out, we kind of go away from our problem, we just kind of enter into some other, situation, some other world, and we go, man, that's it. I can totally use that. I can see that. So right now we're working on a project where we're trying to get people to sort of lay down a certain behavior, right? We're trying to kind of nudge this group of people to lay down a certain behavior. And the end goal, of course, is a health change, right? So that's the end goal. But what we've been sort of struggling with is how can we build a system, sort of a bunch of bumpers that kind of nudge these people along and get them to the point where they're laying down that behavior long enough. And so we started to use, a very simple communication channel because we knew that at the heart of this thing, they've got to communicate. They have to start to build some network and bond amongst themselves because, you kind of build allies. And once you have allies, you're much more likely to actually do something, okay? And that encouragement kind of drives you along. So social networks are well known to do that. So we started to do that. But the more important thing is that we sort of stole from the external world a very simple concept, right? We stole the idea of how can I make that behavior, which is a non-competitive behavior, how can I draw some attention and give positive support and feedback? How can we create some kind of a leaderboard scenario that allows a person, when they see their name in lights, they get excited and then they start doing something and they start adding to that behavior. So that simple concept of leaderboard, there's my first 10 minutes. And so that simple concept of leaderboard is critical. Now, we've seen this in other places. We've seen it in sports. We've seen it in you name it, some idea of status or stature. Giving humans the ability to have some kind of status or stature drives their behavior. It sort of drives like, hey, that's cool. I got positive reward. I got positive feedback. It's got to be immediate, and therefore I go again. So let's kind of use that as an example. We've got this leaderboard. These people are trying to do something positive for their health. Okay, these are not fit, not necessarily people who are eating well. Okay, we've picked on eating and physical activity as the two behaviors of choice. We've created leaderboards for them to automatically put, using some kind of a social media type, sort of endeavor, put information in. That information goes in, compares it to another group of people, and then it sort of sorts them accordingly. That simple procedure, once we got that figured out, that simple procedure of creating a leaderboard, which we stole from sports, very simple, okay, which is well known, right? I mean, like NASCAR or a golf tournament, you step away, you watch that for a bit, and you go, man, you see how we all want to view on that leaderboard. We're sort of locked in. So let's apply it to this behavior, okay? It will not produce a result into itself. Right? So doing this behavior today will not give you an immediate result. But what it will do is it will slowly and steadily reinforce the action itself, which draws more people into the network, okay? Which reinforces the behavior, which allows that person to continue on. Eventually, they'll get results. We know that. That part's not the problem. The problem is, can they do it long enough, consistently enough to actually get there? And lo and behold, that's exactly what we've seen. So in a 1-week period, we've seen about 500 entries from about 100 people. Okay, so what that tells us is that we're getting about 5 entries per week on average. Now we know there's even more people who are doing more than that because not all 100 people are actually actively entering. Okay, so if we got 500 times people to think about what they're eating and their activity over the course of a week, will that drive their behavior? The answer, of course, is yes. We know that. We know that if they do something consistently over time, they eventually will drive their day-to-day, which will eventually drive their outcome. And so that willingness to sort of zoom out, see something out there and go, oh, that's easy. Leaderboard. We can figure that out. Okay. Now, that's been seen in just about every place where we've seen the behavior get repeated. Okay. We know we see it in the fitness athlete component, right? We hear the guys talk about this and we hear about the whiteboards. Fantastic. It does the exact same concept. Okay. Could we do it in the same situation? Could we take the whiteboard in the clinic where we share information, very simple information like, hey, here's the thought for the day, which I know people are doing, which is awesome. Can we take that and go one step further and say, hey, this week's leaderboard, we're going to do air squats, whatever. We're gonna do a fundamental movement. I'm we're gonna test my ability to get down to the floor. Everyone's going to do it. I can put a mat out in the clinic and everyone's going to do it. Hey, have you done your floor to stand transfer today? Very simple, very easy. But what does that do? That gets a person thinking about their movement. It gets a person thinking about, can they actually do this stuff, right? Or you could have easily a leaderboard of, fruits and vegetables. Put a hash mark next to your name as you walk in the door if you had a day where you got 5 or whatever. Like, it doesn't really matter what the behavior is. The question is can you start to build the consistency in? So we do that by understanding That's the key, right? That's kind of how the whole thing comes full circle. We do that by stepping away from a hard problem. Getting people to change their behavior is a hard problem. It is not easy. No one does it well, okay? But if we can back away, build in some little sort of, prods and pokes so that people will, sort of do it a little bit, then over time we begin to actually build some compassion with that person, and they understand us and we understand them, and we both understand that we're on the same side, that we're both trying to do the same thing. And once we do that, once a person goes like, man, that person really is trying to help me be my best, do my best, whatever that is, once we do that, then and only then are we at that level of compassion where we're actually able to dive in beyond the cranky knee, the cranky ankle, whatever. We can really get into what makes that person tick. And what I would tell you is that is going to help drive both their creativity in their life, their relaxation response, their ability to have mental health. I mean, you name it, allows them to flourish. Now, what happens when they leave? They immediately tell their friend. There you get into that social networking component. You get into them pulling in their own network, and the whole thing cycles back again. And before you know it, you've created this loop. You've created a very simple, straightforward loop. Why? Because you just sort of stepped back and said, what are we really after here? Let me think for a second. What are we really after? What isn't working? It isn't working because I can't tap into that network. I can't tap into that network because the person won't pull me into the network. They won't pull me into the network because they're not inspired. They're not inspired because I'm just kind of going through the motions. I'm going through the motions because I'm so focused on this one tiny little bitty problem instead of focusing on the person overall and their needs. And the minute that we do that, the minute that we get to that empathic civilization and use the communication tools that we have, the minute we can start to tap into really big numbers of people, and that allows us to do two things. It allows us to have a much bigger effect, and it allows us to lower our cost per person, which when we do that is when the uptake grows even greater. That, in essence, is what we're after. All right, I'm beyond 15 minutes. I could keep going. There's a lot here. You can see that this is not something that is simple. This is something that is complex. But that complexity, if we're willing to step back and look at it, can take us where we want to go. It's only Monday. I can tell you, for me, this week is going to be an important one because there's a lot going on. And it allows me to now sort of take this stuff and say, all right, how am I going to apply that? I hope you'll do the same thing. It's only Monday. Make it count.